I mean, if I look back over the 20 years I've been doing this now, I don't think it's changed a lot. Most organizations still look at what's good for them rather than taking that, to a certain extent, a leap of faith to go, actually, if we do what's good for the customer and what's good for us, then we will improve things. I mean, and the other thing that I find amazing is, I don't think we've ever been involved in an implementation that doesn't save money.
You're listening to the B2B Growth Think Tank, the show that brings you the virtual hot seat where each week my expert guests and I help another business leader by masterminding actionable solutions to a specific challenge they're currently trying to solve in their business. So if you're looking for answers to a specific challenge that you're facing, that if you could solve in the next 90 days would have a huge impact on your growth, send it in to thinkttank@thinklikeafish.co.uk and we'll see if we can feature you on the show. My name is Adam King, your host and the captain of the ship at growth consultancy Think Like a Fish. And if you're ready to rethink what's possible for your business and discover the growth strategies, advice and insight to turn this new vision into a reality, let's get started. Hey, Adam here, and thanks very much for tuning in. And as you are, I'm going to make the assumption that you are responsible for generating revenue for an established B2B professional service business, and you're looking to grow your revenue. So what I've got for you, you're going to absolutely love, because I've recently released my new revenue multiplier calculator and bonus training, where using this tool and following the training, you'll discover how to uncover the hidden revenue opportunities in your business and be able to systemize your growth using 7 revenue multipliers that can double your business in 12 months or less. So if you want to go and grab your copy, go to thinklikeafish.co.uk/calculator. Now, on to today's episode. Hello and welcome to the B2B Growth Think Tank. Now, joining me today to talk business growth and to help out a fellow business leader on the Virtual Hot Seat is one of the original pioneers of the concept of customer experience, and today having written no less than 7 books on the subject. Now, not only that, he has also been recognised by LinkedIn as one of the world's top 150 business influencers, where he's now one of just a small official LinkedIn influencers with over 289,444 followers, and I'm sure that is literally going up as I'm talking. Now, his management consultancy, going down, who knows? Now, his management consultancy, Beyond Philosophy LLC, has been selected by the Financial Times as one of the best management consultancies for the last 3 years in a row. And on top of helping his clients grow by helping them focus on finding value and identifying hidden, unmet customer needs that are proven to drive revenue, he is also the co-host of a highly successful Intuitive Customer podcast, which is a fantastic show, by the way, and you should definitely go and have a listen. I'm sure we'll hear more about that as we go on. So look, as I completely admit, from a purely selfish point of view, as I'm sure you're also about to hear, I think what you're going to hear is my guest today has taken my own worldview of thinking like the fish and not the fisherman to a whole new level. So I am seriously excited at the prospect of geeking out a little bit on exactly why customer experience is one of the highest leverage growth strategies out there and how you can apply it to your business and grow your business too. So I'm absolutely honoured to welcome Colin Shaw to the show. Colin, how are you doing?
I'm absolutely wonderful, Adam. Thanks very much for having us on the show. And I always look forward to a geek out. So,
yeah, definitely. Well, I've got to be a little bit honest with you, Colin, in the lead up to this and sort of doing my research and all the rest of it. I started getting a little bit nervous, a little bit anxious and all the rest of it, because not only have you obviously sort of achieved a lot and all the rest of it, but it's something that since sort of discovering you, and I've binge listened to a few of your podcasts, which are very good. And I think what I've come to is a sense of too much choice to where to go with this conversation.
Right.
And I know that is a big thing around the customer experience and some of the stuff you do and all the rest of it. So it's almost like, where do I start?
Sure.
Because there is so many things that we could go on. But I think possibly the best place to go is, why don't you give us your own version of the sort of professional journey that you've got to get to this point where you've literally got that list of accolades behind you?
Okay, so I'll try not to turn your listeners off straight away by talking for the next 10 minutes about it. But basically, the short version is I spent most of my life in corporate life, and most of my life actually in the B2B area of corporate life. And then I read a really good book called Who Moved My Cheese? I don't know if you've ever read that book. And it asked one question in the book, which I found fascinating, which was, because I sort of achieved what I wanted to do in corporate life. And it asked one question in the book, which I thought was really good, which was, what would you do if you weren't scared? So this was back in 2002. And I was effectively getting into customer experience at that point. I thought that it could be something that businesses needed to do and to focus on. I think there's always these waves of change that go across business, whether it's CRM or data, digital transformation, those types of big waves of change. So I decided to leave my secure job in corporate life and set up Beyond Philosophy. So that was back in 2002. Started off, as everybody does, in their bedroom, thinking, what the hell have I done, and how the hell am I going to get any business in? And just basically built the company up from there by really just trying to, the one of the phrases that we use, or the company name, is Beyond Philosophy. So what we're trying to indicate by that is to go, you need to have a philosophy or a thought or a strategy, but the key is you've got to go beyond it and do something. So it's not just about intellectualization of a topic, because that doesn't do anything. You've actually got to go away and do something. So and that's what we've done. We've effectively, what we've done over the years has been constantly come up with new thinking and developed our thought process, but also then sort of back that up with ways of actually doing things to get results. And therefore, in getting the results, therefore more clients want to talk to you. Therefore, the Financial Times, when they ask people who's one of the leading consultancies, they say Beyond Philosophy, because we get results. So
and that is a key. I guess that is one of the key things to consider when thinking customer experience, because at the very end, a customer is with you because they want some form of result.
Yeah, and
that must form part of the customer experience.
But I think the other thing I would add to that is the organization wants the result. So one of the mistakes I think that organizations make at the moment, or CX programs make at the moment, is they're not focused so much around getting the result. So increasing sales, increasing loyalty, increasing retention. It's a bit more sort of nebulous. And therefore, if I'm a CEO, I'm sitting there going, I'm investing in this program, whether it's people, resources, whatever. I want to see a return. Where's the money back that I'm getting?
And it's kind of always been that way, but maybe sort of pre-COVID that things were going in the way that they were. It wasn't so much a focus on that. And I don't know if you've noticed it, but I've certainly noticed that shift towards people being much, much more focused on what is the return? What is the result for investing in XYZ service, for buying product, for buying, for hiring people, for all those sorts of things. And I think that is actually a good thing. I think that it really does. It means that we get much more focused on not just the deliverables that we do, the things that we provide, but it's what is that transformation? What is the point A that your client, your ideal client is in, and what is the point B?
Yeah.
And then you've exposed the gap, and that is where your service or your product fits.
So,
and I think that's one of the things we don't always consider. I think that,
Let me draw you an analogy that will suit you. We were speaking before the show about the fact I go fishing. Okay, if I go fishing and I don't catch fish, I've not had a good day. I've had quite a good day because I've been out on the water and blah 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 blah. Okay, but if I've caught one fish, I'd rather catch 10. Yeah, so that's the output. That's the measurement of the output, and that's exactly what businesses should be looking at. Is I'm investing in improving the customer experience. How much more profit, more customers are we gaining, etc.
So, I mean, sort of, let's play on this a little bit, because I like the analogy, and clearly. But if we're thinking result, and if we're thinking from a customer experience point of view, if you were someone that was running fishing charters, for example, and you were saying to people, well, come on our fishing charter, and what we will do, we'll take you out and we will treat you well, and, you know, we provide the best service and blah, 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 and that's it. Or if you say to someone, if you come out with us, we will guarantee that you will catch a sailfish or whatever it may well be, something that they are, somebody is absolutely doing, and you do whatever it takes, even if they have to come back the next day and the next day and the next day. Like, is that the kind of thing you're talking about with a kind of results focus there, or is it something slightly different?
So I think the issue is this is the first thing that we do virtually in every engagement that we are involved with, which is you need to define what drives value for the organization. So for your fishing charter, they want to have their boat full of people that are paying a good price and blah, 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 blah. So the issue becomes, well, what's the key thing that drives value for us? Okay. And that could be customer loyalty coming back, or the boat being full, or whatever else. And then the issue is, well, what is it that we need to offer to the customer that would make them come back to us time after time after time? Yeah. And what we discover, and this is where it starts getting a bit not complicated, but fascinating, I think, is that what you discover is what customers tell you and what they do can be very different. So the second book I wrote was called Revolutionize Your Customer Experience, and it was all about customer centricity. So I always find it very odd, me saying the next thing, which is sometimes you shouldn't listen to your customers, okay? Because they don't necessarily know or can articulate what is driving their behavior. So let me give you an example. Disney know when they ask their guests what people are going to the park, what they want to eat at a theme park. Disney know that people say they'd like to have an option of a salad. Disney also know that people don't eat salads when they go to theme parks. They eat hot dogs and hamburgers, okay? So consequently, there is a difference between going out and, in your analogy, asking that group of fishermen, what is it you want? Well, I want to be able to catch a big fish, and I want to do this and I want to do that. And actually, what's the real motivator? Okay, the hidden motivator, and that's where it gets into understanding human behavior at a much deeper level. So I'm going to shut up in a minute. So when we look at a customer experience, we look at it from a rational perspective. What's the customer doing? We look at then, well, why are they doing that? Which is typically around how they feel or want to feel. So about emotions. We look at the subconscious, so the hidden messages that organizations give you. So you go into a bank and they put pens on chains, which says we don't trust you. And then we look at the psychological aspects of things, which is, so why do human beings do what they do? Okay. And that subconscious and psychological part reveal the hidden motivations behind things. I mean, just as another example, we've experienced around the world people going, I'm not going to vote for, this person. And then, Donald Trump, Boris, whoever it is, get into power, and there's a difference between what people are saying and what people are doing. So you've really got to get under the skin of what does a customer really want? And it's not just good enough to ask. You also have to see what they're doing and use some different form of research to identify it.
I mean, there's so much in there that is, I mean, this is why I find this whole, what I do is sort of primarily marketing and all the rest of it, but it's the psychology behind it. It's the behavioral economics, and it's understanding that really business is just about people. It's about people that work for you. It's about people you serve. And the fastest way to get a faster growing business is to really understand the behaviors of the people that both operate it and also that come into contact with it.
Yeah.
Now, that whether that be through your marketing, through your fulfillment, your delivery, through how your staff interact, all that kind of thing. And what I found really interesting looking into what you guys do, and then listening to your podcast, for example, is that you have a PhD professor as your co-host.
Yes. Yeah.
And what's fascinating when you listen to that is that you've got, it's kind of like we were referring to at the beginning. It's kind of like you've got the get it done stuff that you kind of have been focused on over the last few years. And then you have the thinking, the ideas, the academic side of things. It's kind of backing up the reasons to do something. And sometimes we need to know and understand why something is the way that it is before we're even prepared to take the action on it.
Sure.
So that's why I think that podcast works really well. You've got both the academic and the intelligence behind it and the research and everything, and then you come in with the practical experience of how to apply. I think it's a fantastic dynamic, and absolutely everyone that is listening, go and check it out. It's the Inquisitive Customer podcast.
And that, to be honest with you, I'm glad you picked that up because that's exactly the approach we were taking. Professor Ryan Hamilton, comes at it from an academic perspective. I come at it from so it's that Beyond Philosophy bit, of going, okay, well, here's something really intelligent that Ryan understands and has got the data for. And I go, well, okay, this is how you can then apply it.
Yeah. So tell me what that actually means.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing.
The question I'm always asking is, so what? So what does that mean that, that's a really interesting theory, but so what does that mean that we need to do? The other thing that's great about, and I think really just sort of shows up on some of the things we're saying, is that Ryan used to be a believe it or not, a stand-up comedian. So we get on well, and that I think sort of comes out in the banter that we have. And and the reason I'm mentioning that is because you form a relationship with the audience, and people get to sort of know you under a more personal level rather than just talking about customer experience.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that the conscious decision to go the route of, first of all, having a podcast in your business, but then thinking strategically about how you're going to have a podcast that's slightly different is related to the kind of customer experience that you want to deliver for the people that are potentially coming into contact with your business, yes, but also your team, your staff, because as you say, there's a relationship that's happening between them. And I think this is one thing about podcasts that people don't necessarily pick up on. And that is, if you're a larger company and you have a team and you have people in your company that are listening to, say, the CEO of the company, they get to hear a very different side of them that they might not necessarily see all the time every day. So I think it's a relationship building tool, obviously, for the external, but also the internal. And that also is a customer experience because your staff, theoretically, you could class them as a customer. But I think that's the whole thing around when people think marketing, they just think it's lead generation or it's advertising or something like that. It's not. It's the whole spectrum. It's the before, the during, the after.
Yeah.
And I think that the biggest opportunity to grow is generally within both the during and the after, because it's that experience that gets people coming back for more, that gets people talking about you, that gets people becoming advocates, that generates referrals, that blah, 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 all that kind of thing. And I sort of think that it's the thing that people miss.
Sure. Yes. Yeah, no,
So what is it? Why do you think that is, first of all? Like, is there a reason why you think that people don't necessarily think about customer experience as a growth lever?
I think they feel it's just a bit nebulous. I think they feel that and I've been sort of fighting this for 20 years. They feel it's a bit nebulous. They feel it is, they're not. Most organizations still are not outwardly looking. I mean, if I look back over the 20 years I've been doing this now, I don't think it's changed a lot. Most organizations still look at what's good for them rather than taking that, to a certain extent, a leap of faith to go, actually, if we do what's good for the customer and what's good for us, then we will improve things. I mean, and the other thing that I find amazing is, I don't think we've ever been involved in an implementation that doesn't save money, because a bad experience ends up costing you money, either costing you money because the customer phones you back to to check on things, and then that causes a phone call into the call center and blah, 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 or a complaint or wherever it may be, or cost you money because the customer leaves you and then you've got to do marketing and advertising to get a customer back, and that all costs money. So I think the interesting thing is it's not treated at the moment as a proper discipline. So what I mean by that is, which organization would say, we don't need a marketing department, we don't need a sales department, we don't need, a finance department, but not all organizations are saying, yeah, we need a customer experience department. And even if they have customer service, which I think is different to customer experience, then the customer service is still treated as a second-class citizen, and treated as more as a cost center than anything else. So for me, the biggest thing I've learned over the last 20 years is this is about a mindset. You've got to change the mindset of people in the organization to recognize the fact that understanding customer behavior, understanding people behavior, and therefore segmenting it into customer behavior, because actually, guess what? The same thing applies to employees. So the employee experience is the same thing. Understanding that pays off and pays dividends and can do massive growth. I mean, let me give you one example. One of our clients, Maersk Line, who are the largest container shipping company in the world, improved their net promoter score by 40 points over 30 months. And that led to a 10% rise in shipping volumes. Okay. So you're talking about a lot of money. Yeah. 10% rise in shipping volumes, a lot of money. And now if you said to an organization, would you like to do that? Then most organizations would go, yeah, that's great. But when you then say, well, these are the things you've got to do to change, either they don't necessarily understand or want to make that change, which, that could be that they're not serious enough about it.
And I'm glad you brought up Net Promoter Score, because it was going to be one of my sort of questions, because if you have any sort of understanding around sort of the customer experience and everything, you have probably heard around Net Promoter Score. And I think for anyone thinking, well, what's one quick way of maybe utilizing this idea around customer experience? I would have thought something like at least keeping track of your Net Promoter Score is a good way of doing it. And I think that your Net Promoter Score should be one of your 3 or 4 key KPIs on the dashboard that you run your business, especially if you're at scale.
Sure.
Because if you start to see that go down, you will start to see other things happening, and you've got to then ask yourself, because the numbers only tell a certain story. It's like, what are the numbers telling you? Why is that promoter score dropping? Why is that promoter score low? It could be all number of things. It could be that your staff are unhappy. They're not following a process. Sure. They don't know what their process is.
Sure.
It could be that there's a problem with the product. It could be the problem with all sorts of different things. But unless you know that score, and you cannot see if it's going up or down, you cannot then go back in and start to actually unpack the reasons for it.
Yeah.
And so everything else, if you're just chucking things in at the top, is that the best use of your budget?
No, I mean, Net Promoter is a good thing to have, but it's not the be all and end all to life, the universe, and everything. Okay, we have organisations contact us and say we want to implement Net Promoter, and our reaction to that is, Net Promoter is good, and you should have a Net Promoter as one of the measures. But let me ask you a couple of other questions. Okay, so this is how typically we would start off. What drives value for the organization? Okay, so which part of the customer experience drives value for you? In other words, what is the organization, what part of that experience gets the increase in Net Promoter or revenue, etc.? And then the next question for us is, well, what is the experience that you're trying to deliver to your customers? Okay. And I would ask your listeners to think about that question for their organization, because what we discover is that most organizations do not have a clear articulation of the experience they're trying to deliver. Okay. Marketing do what they think's the right thing, customer service do what they think's the right thing, sales do what they think's the right thing. So now let's assume that you know what drives value, you've defined what the experience is. Guess what? You should then be measuring that experience, and you should be measuring it along with the Net Promoter Score, because the challenge is just having Net Promoter doesn't tell you what you need to fix. You know it's going down, and from that list of things you just gave us, Adam, yes, it could be any of them. Okay, but what is it? And why is it's going down? So you've got to start to get into the detail of it. So for us, you drive what's driving value, what's the experience, and then you're into some of the measurement of those things, and Net Promoters included in that.
And to understand what that journey looks like and what a customer wants, you actually have to talk to them. Like a lot of business, it just baffles me, and it's why you sort of when you mentioned that customer service is seen as a cost center, not nothing else. And it's like, well, actually, if you think about it, they are your source of your best intelligence around the customers, potentially, because they're talking to them all the time.
Sure.
They're hearing them either at their best or at their worst.
Sure.
So get some of the language. What are people upset about? What are they complaining about? What are they ecstatic about? Like all those sorts of things. And you can start to sort of feed that back into an organization and adjust your messaging, adjust your marketing, adjust the product, adjust, all that sort of stuff. There's so much opportunity to actually utilize it as a profit center because it's a source of innovation.
Yeah.
There's one way of doing it.
Yeah. I think that, so I would absolutely agree that you've got to, those people in the front line have got to do that and feed that back. But the issue for me becomes the interpretation of what that means. All right. So now let's go back down into those 4 bits: rational, emotional, subconscious, psychological. So you can pick out how a customer is currently feeling by the words that they use. Okay. So looking at something like text analytics or sentiment analysis, you can start to understand how the customer is feeling. So if part of the experience that you're trying to deliver is you want your customers to feel cared for, and your customer is currently feeling frustrated that you pick up, you've got to go down this sort of path to get there. So I think the important thing is the interpretation of what the customer's saying. So again, I go back to it. It's the Disney thing. Let me give you another example. We did some work in the States for a hospital system. Okay. And the perceived wisdom from the customer feedback was that patients wanted to spend more time with doctors. Fairly reasonable. You can imagine that for yourself. I want to spend more time with my doctor, so they understand me. Yeah. When we do a special form of research where we look under the skin of the sort of that hidden motivation. What we discovered was that it wasn't that patients wanted to spend more time with the doctors. What we discovered was that patients wanted to feel that the doctor listened to them.
Well, I can relate to that.
So absolutely, and I think everybody can. But so think of it. On one side, you've got, I want to spend more time with the doctors. Okay, let's increase the number of doctors we've got. Let's increase the appointment times that we've got. Let's, change our systems to do that. That's one thing. You could do that. And if the patient didn't feel you listened to them, you've doubled the amount of time with them. You've increased your cost base dramatically, but they're still not bloody listening to them. Okay. So that it doesn't solve.
They're still pissed off.
Absolutely. It still doesn't solve the problem.
No.
But listening to them, you go, well, actually, so what needs to happen is, why is there this perception that they weren't listening to them, which effectively fell into 2 areas. One area was that they'd implemented a new computer system. So the doctors were spending lots of time filling out information. Okay. And that was taking their attention away. And the second thing was they weren't trained on how to listen to people. Okay, so, train the doctor on what you need to do to listen to them, making eye contact, all those types of things. Spending, remember you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you use them in that ratio. So I guess the point, and sorry, I get carried away with this stuff. So let me then take a step back. If you then go back to measurement, well, what are you measuring? Are you measuring the amount of time with the doctor? Well, we've increased the amount of time with the doctor, and we're at 98% of achieving that time with the doctor. Well, actually, you're measuring the wrong bloody thing. You should be measuring, does the patient feel that the doctor listened to them? So it's getting under the skin of that behavior, not just taking, and this is getting back to the point, not just taking what the customer's saying, but looking at that and examining that and diving beneath it to go, okay, well, what are the hidden motivations here? What is happening from a psychological perspective that is forcing that behavior? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it kind of like the famous saying that, Henry Ford said, if I asked people what they want, they would say a faster horse, that kind of thing. But it also reminds me of like one of my favorite books in the world is To Kill a Mockingbird. And Atticus Finch has a line in that book that says something along the lines of you'll never know a man until you crawl into his skin and walk around in it for a day.
Sure.
And I think that when it comes to how we as business leaders sort of see our customers, we don't necessarily think about, maybe walk in their shoes is a better way of saying it. But it's kind of like, if you don't deeply sort of understand what an average day looks like, what the, as you say, the rational, the emotional, the psychological, the rest of it, then you could end up solving the wrong problem.
Yeah.
And I think that is a critical thing that so many businesses get distracted by. They are dealing with symptoms and not causes on so many different levels.
Sure.
Whether it's customer experience, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing. It's like, well, I'm not getting enough leads, so what do I need to do? Well, I'm just going to go and X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, maybe it's not because you need to do more campaigns or anything like that. Maybe your messaging is wrong. Maybe your target market is off. Maybe your industry is shifted, and the cycles that have that have sort of dictated how things are bought and all the rest of it have shifted, and you just haven't paid attention. There's so many reasons why it could happen that you're not, going after a symptom is going to just dig your hole deeper a lot of the time. So yeah, there's an awful lot in here that, there's just so much. But what I want to be able to do is just sort of flip a little bit, and let's come on to a question that I'd like to ask you around sort of growing your own business. And that is, have you found that outside of the customer experience side of things, what would you say is like your favorite at the moment growth strategy or tactic that you're employing within your own business?
To a certain extent, I don't think it's changed. So there's one thing that I live by, which is Oscar Wilde. Okay, and Oscar Wilde once said, there's only one thing worse than being talked about, and that's not being talked about. Okay. And the issue for me is that to grow your business. So in fact, let me take a step back, because this again may help some of your listeners. When I left corporate life, and I'd spent 2 or 3 years on customer experience at that point. So this is back in 2000, which seems ages ago now, doesn't it? But anyway, what I realized was I knew a hell of a lot about customer experience, okay? But what I also realized was that nobody knew that I knew a lot. Does that make sense? So the issue was nobody knew that I was really good at customer experience, which led you down the path of write a book, okay? Now, I think that market has changed and everything else, but I think that I wouldn't call it a hack, because hack always means sort of shortcut. The getting out there and telling people what you do, but telling them in a way that is, and not telling them what you do. That's actually the wrong way of me describing this. It's giving them good content that is different to everybody else. Okay. So we may be about customer experience, but when you look at the customer experience, as you're no doubt aware, there's 50 million people now doing customer experience. Okay. But the bit that we focus on is the bit of customer experience that is about that emotional, psychological, subconscious aspect. Okay. Very few people are looking at that. Okay. Now, we didn't start off like that. It started off as customer experience. So the point I'm trying to make is you've got to differentiate yourself, and you've got to be prepared to put your opinion out there that may be different to other people. But you got to do that in a simple way where you can tell simple stories and analogies, like the Disney one, like the doctor one. So everyone sits there and goes, oh yeah, that makes sense. So you bringing it down to that sort of common level. And then, as we know, there's 50 million channels that you can get that stuff.
Yeah,
through.
So I think what you're saying is it's kind of like, again, knowing your ideal audience, and then knowing the message that you want to sort of project to them, what you want to be known for, because you know that's what's important for them, and saying it in a different way. Yes. You got to be, for me, you got to be different to the herd. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just an also ran, that you got to be saying something different, and it's not saying it for something different sake, but again, too many organizations just carry on doing what they've been doing for the last 20 years. So here's the interesting bit. If I looked at the book, my first book, Building Great Customer Experiences, if I read that now, although it was pretty advanced at the time, I now go, bloody hell, everybody knows that now, but it's 20 years old. So, but if you look at the subsequent books and the subsequent works that we've done, there's a progression there in the understanding and the thinking, basically. Well, yeah, I mean, it all sort of comes back to, your Oscar Wilde quote, and it's kind of like, to use my analogy, it's kind of like you've got to be prepared to swim against the tide and think and ask yourself the question, what if everybody else is wrong?
Sure.
And not that they're wrong because what they're doing is completely wrong. It's just like, well, maybe they haven't looked at it from this angle. Sure. Maybe they haven't considered this point of view.
Sure.
And actually being prepared to get criticism for it.
Yeah.
Because I think I'm sure you've handled a fair amount of criticism because of taking that approach. And then it's about getting that message, that voice out into the market in front of as many potential people as you can. So that's fascinating. I think it's a foundational piece that I think more of us need to consider. So what I'd like to do now then is sort of move on to the virtual hot seat. Hey, it's Adam. Now, just a quick one before we dive into today's virtual hot seat, because as the core philosophy behind the show is a rising tide lifts all ships, I'd love to invite you to come and hang out with me, my guests, and other business owners and directors of established businesses with a track record of providing good, solid service and a positive reputation in their market inside the B2B growth think tank community, where we all connect, solve problems, and help each other grow more profitable businesses. It's free to join, so come along, join us at thinklikeafish.co.uk/think tank group. I look forward to welcoming you, but first, let's get to today's virtual hot seat. So this is the part of the show, for anyone that hasn't listened before, where we have a listener question that has sent in a challenge that they're currently facing, or they have an opportunity in front of them they want to maximize. So today's virtual hot seat question that Colin and I will have a bit of a brainstorm around and try and help them out is, I want our business to move from a service-based model to a consulting-based model. Now, the work we've done previously has always been around bringing a solution to a business and implementing it for them. And a big part of the value in offering my service is that these businesses, they don't have the time or desire necessarily to do the work themselves, but they need the result. And I'm a little bit concerned or slightly worried that this may well upset some of the existing clients that we have, and maybe some of our existing team isn't necessarily equipped with the right skill set to make this shift. So do you think this is a good direction to go, or and if you do, is this do you have any advice for making this kind of pivot? So what's the first impression of hearing that? I mean, obviously we don't have the ability to qualify, but when you hear that, because you run a consultancy, did you ever do done for you services for people and then have to do the shift, or has it always been the consultancy model?
We've actually been we've always been the consultancy. So we do consultancy and training. 60% of our stuff is consultancy work. But I have to say the view that we've always taken, and this is this goes back to my experience in corporate life where I was employing consultants, okay, was, and again, you're like this because of the analogy, it's the teaching the man to fish bit, okay? So when I was in corporate life, we used to have all of the big consultancies come in and would come up with all these clever things and then would want to implement this, would like to do this to us, okay? And I didn't want them to do it to us. I wanted to learn how to do it, okay? So what we did was, and the way that we work is, and one of the differences, go back to what I said before about, being different to other people. One of the things that we do is that when we go into a client, we guide them. We don't implement it for them, okay? And we bring their team members into our team. And part of our selling point is they will work alongside us, and they will gain skills transfer because they're working alongside us. So we can give them, say, like something like journey mapping. We will train them on our journey mapping that looks at those 4 areas: rational, emotional, subconscious, psychological. And we will implement that. We will put them on a training course with us to start off with, but that group of people will work alongside us as we do the journey mapping. Why? Because there's lots of journeys. And in my view, you shouldn't be trying to, keep all of that intellectual property to yourself and go, no, if you do it again, you've got to use us, and you've got to do it again, you use us. What I think that organizations want to do is they want to bring that knowledge in-house, okay? And then the way that we sort of monetize that for a future, because you could argue you're cutting your nose off to spite your face by doing that, is that as our knowledge and everything improves, then consequently we change things. So if I go back to this question, one thing I've learned is definitions are always interesting, so I don't really necessarily understand the exact situation. But it depends on the market and where you're looking to go to. So if you think that there is more value to be gained from the organization by moving into this type of market where you're more consultancy, and it means that you are going to upset some of your customers, yeah, that's life, in fact, I was just approving a podcast that we did a couple of weeks ago called Firing Your Customers. So, and I'm not going to go off at a tangent, but it applies here is, just because you got this group of customers now doesn't necessarily mean to say that that's you need to have them and they're going to be the one that sustains you in 10 years' time. Yeah. So it could be that you have to move away from those customers.
And that was going to be a point I wanted to sort of touch on as well, is that it's almost sort of thinking like what has led, because we obviously don't know, but my sort of mind goes towards what's led to this shift. It could well be that they are having, the only way they can grow is by hiring additional staff, which, impacts margin and all the rest of it. And then you've got the overhead and you have to continue to bring people on and all that kind of thing. So there's a bit of a fear element with rising overhead. You're going to have to keep the pipeline full and keep clients in and all the rest of it. So there's a bit of a fear element in there. But I think that really it's about sort of asking yourself, okay, well, it's a little bit what you've been saying. It's like, what's valuable to you as the company? Like, what's valuable to you as the owner of the business? Like, what do you enjoy doing? And, is the model that you want to shift to going to actually support the way that you want to spend your day for a start?
Yeah.
And also, asking yourself the question of the kind of clients you work with, are these the kind of clients I want to continue working with if they are not going to support my vision for my business? And if not, as you say, c'est la vie. Yeah. It's the way it is. It may well be that you have to shift your target market. It may well be, you're going to have to shift everything. Sure. Because I've personally been through this transition. I sort of left corporate world and started my own thing, was a bit of a consultant doing strategy work for people, and then I became a kind of an agency where we did a lot of the stuff for people, and then I realized I was just a project manager and I didn't want to do that. I actually wanted to be working with people, and I realized that I didn't want to be the single point of failure or have our business as the center point of failure, because if something happened, they have their oxygen supply cut off.
Sure.
And I love the way that you said, teach a man to fish, you'll eat for a lifetime. That's one of the things that I now say, because it's like I would rather empower people to be in control of their own growth destiny and their own whatever it is destiny than actually being reliant on somebody that could just turn around and say, I don't want to work with you anymore.
Sure.
See ya.
Sure.
I mean, it's that sort of thing. So yeah,
it could be with this that, it's as simple as the people that you're currently dealing with are the wrong people. The customers you're dealing with are the wrong people. You need to put your prices up. If the customers that you are putting your prices up don't like it, well, maybe they're the wrong customers then.
Absolutely, because there's another way to increase and grow and scale. It's by charging them more, and then you free up resources.
And if you're putting more resources in, then and this goes back to we all know that running your own business is tough. Okay, you got to make tough choices, and a tough choice could be, actually, I think this market over here is more lucrative and I need to move to this market, which means dropping out this group of customers, and they may not like it and that you may lose some customers. But if you think this market is more lucrative, then go for it.
I mean, I think it's a question that obviously we can't answer 100% without the context, but it does have to be a question you answer for yourself at the end of the day.
Sure.
I think they're at that sort of, go, no go point, and they're, trying to work out whether or not this is the right thing. Ultimately, you're going to need to make that decision for yourself. But then I think practically what you need to do is consider, what will the transition look like?
Sure.
Like, how long do you anticipate that transition actually happening for? You're not going to get it done in a week. I'll tell you that now.
Sure. Here's the other question I would ask. Actually, it goes back to that book, Who Moved My Cheese? What would you do if you weren't scared? So the danger is that mixed up in this decision is bloody hell, what happens if I lose all this revenue and everything else? Which clearly, but you've got to try to take that emotion out of it and go, well, what would I do if I wasn't scared about this? What's the logical steps that I would take?
Love it. And some of the other things you could maybe do is just start scaling back some of the actual done for you services and run workshops with your clients to show them how to do some of the bits.
Yeah.
Maybe it's to partner with an outsourcer or a VA company, for example, and refer your client to them where you would train the VAs in your process.
Yeah.
And do it that way. Like there's so many different ways of thinking about it that if you're worried about that side of things, well, the other side of things is, if that does become the case, before you make that decision, go and find other people that do something similar to you and say, I'm about to probably fire 80% of my clients.
Sure.
If I was to pass them your way,
that makes me think, as you were reading the question, my immediate reaction was, why is it black and white? Why can't you do both for a period of time?
It has to be a transition.
Yeah. So, it
has to be.
Yeah. So.
Well, I hope that's helped. I think there's some food for thought, but ultimately, I do think it's a decision that you're going to have to make on your own, and you have to be prepared for there to be a transition. And you have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Really, why am I doing this? And where is the value going to come from as a result of making the decision, yes or no? And what would I do if it didn't scare me? I think that is a lovely one to sort of end on there. So thank you very much for that one, Colin. I do think that there's a lot of things that that person can actually sort of implement and think about. So, we're sort of coming towards the end, but I want to sort of make sure that, honestly, there's so many things I have in my head that I'd love to ask you and all the rest of it, but I couldn't I couldn't do my listeners and my audience a service without asking you about the whole LinkedIn influencer side of things. And has that been something that you've consciously cultivated, and what's your process been around that? And what has that done for you?
So the interesting bit, I guess, is that I was approached to be an influencer when the original influencer. So LinkedIn set up an influencer program. I must be doing this for 7 or 8 years now, I suppose. And the irony.
By the way, sorry, Colin, just in case anyone listening doesn't really understand what this influence is, this group includes the likes of Richard Branson.
Yeah.
Obama and like literally, this is a big list.
Yeah, so. It is. And let me also say, I'm nowhere near as clever as they are. So the irony was that when I got the email, I thought it was a spoof and nearly deleted it and didn't reply. So when they said, "Would you like to be an influencer?" I went, "I don't think this is real." So anyway, I replied and said yes, and the rest of it is history, as they say. And the way that I've just used it is the way that we were talking about in the past, which is just trying to talk about. It's effectively based upon what we do on the podcast, which is going, here's some theory. So what does it mean? What advantage does that give you? But putting it over in that in a simple and easy to understand way, in a practical way. And I think that's because they've clearly chopped and changed different influencers over the period of time. But that's effectively what seems to be a pretty good formula. They've also implemented this email subscription newsletter service on LinkedIn. I don't know if you've seen that. So I think so for the influencers that we have a newsletter that's managed by LinkedIn. So it's a LinkedIn newsletter called Why Customers Buy, which is effectively, and so each week I write about, again, theory and practical steps of why customers buy. And we've got about, 30,000 people signed up to that as well. But I mean, it's been great, and it's just given me another outlet for doing things. If I'm totally honest, it hasn't necessarily changed a lot of what I was doing, because I was doing that before, which is probably the reason why they asked me to be an influencer in the first place.
Well, there you go. It
becomes a sort of a circular thing.
And there's a lesson in there. It's consistency, because I'm assuming you were doing that on a consistent basis, and adding value and all the rest of it. And I don't think it's about just the content as well, because something that you've said, and also this is a thing that I do wax on a little bit. It's like, it's not just about content, it's about context. It's like, here's the theory, but so what? What's the context? Where can it be applied? How does it fit in the journey that you are on as a business? And should you even be paying attention to it? Because you're not even, you are looking at a symptom, not a cause. So it's kind of like thinking around those, just thinking about it in that way, in that if you're trying to generate attention or gain influence or all the rest of it, it's like, don't be like everybody else, but you've got to show actual context of the content that you're creating, not a listicle thing on LinkedIn because you think it's going to get likes or whatever.
The feedback that we get about about what we do on LinkedIn and what we do on the podcast is quite simple. Is we take a complicated subject and we make it simple, and then we talk about how to apply to it. What I learned very early on is it's very, very easy to take a complicated subject and make you sound super intelligent. But if you think about some of those more famous people, Obama, etc., they've got a way of communicating with people of a complicated topic and putting it over in a simple to understand thing. And that's, I once employed a guy who shall remain nameless, and very clever bloke, much cleverer than I am. And I always used to say to him, look, pretend we were down the pub and you were you were talking to your mates. Now tell me what you would tell your mates, because I was trying to interpret what he was saying and really sort of understand it and being able to then go, okay, so the implications of that are this, and therefore, great idea. Now I've got to do it. And it's that connection, I think, that often gets missed. Either people are just into practical stuff that, not sort of strategically focused, or they're into strategy thoughts that they can't then articulate to people at the shop floor.
And I'm going to try and make myself sound intelligent right here, because there is a neurological reason why that is bad for business. Right. It's because it burns more calories in your brain.
Right. There you go.
As soon as you add complication where people have to interpret what you're trying to say,
sure.
It burns calories.
Sure.
And therefore, they stop listening.
Sure.
Or they turn off.
Sure.
Like it's a neurological reason why you should absolutely make things clear as possible. And it's why I talk about fish when trying to explain marketing, because it's an easier way for people to understand, and analogies and metaphors are another great way of doing it. So Colin, this has been fantastic. Thank you ever so much for joining me. Before I let you go, who is a perfect client for you guys? And if they are a perfect client, how can they contact you?
So most of our clients are large corporates or medium-sized organizations, and typically they're in sort of the marketing, customer service, operations type field. And the best way of contacting us is just through our website, which is www.beyondphilosophy.com. That's beyondphilosophy.com. Or just tap me up on LinkedIn, and obviously the podcast, The Intuitive Customer. It will be
100%. Go and listen to that podcast, because I have binge listened to, I think, 10 episodes since booking this one. It's fantastic. And the final thing I sort of really want to sort of ask you around is, because the theme for this podcast, it's all about really collaboration, helping each other out. A rising tide lifts all ships, that kind of thing. Are you looking for support from anyone that could be in the audience? Are you looking at partnerships? Are you looking at ways of collaborating? Are you looking at opportunities to add your voice to other platforms, that kind of thing? And if so, what sort of things? And therefore, can people again come and contact you in the same way?
Yeah, I mean, never say never. So yes, there is. I'm always willing to listen to new ideas and how people can help, basically. And probably the best thing again would be just to contact us through LinkedIn, and I'll take it on from there.
Any final words of wisdom? Anything that you haven't been able to talk about?
There's one thing which I think that has fascinated me over the last 10 years, and we haven't talked about. So let me just tell you this one last thing, and that this is, when you think about it, customer experience is about a memory. Okay. So if you think about customer loyalty is an emotional attachment. And if you can't be loyal to something that you don't remember. Does that make sense? So by definition of the word loyalty, it means that you're going back there because of the experience that you had last time. And because it's the experience you had last time, by definition, you remembered it. Okay. So one of the biggest thing I've learned over the last 10 years is there's a guy called Professor Daniel Kahneman, who talks about the fact that there's a difference between an experience and remembering that experience. Okay. So he says that we don't choose between experiences, and this is humans, okay? This is not customer experiences. We don't choose between experiences. We choose between the memory of those experiences, okay? And that, for me, when you really think about that, that is profound. So let me repeat that. You don't choose between experiences. You choose between the memory of an experience. So that for me means that for a customer experience, it's the memory that is more important than the experience itself. Does that make sense? Yeah. And therefore, you have to get into how a memory is formed. Okay. And what Kahneman talks about again is the fact that, in fact, you'll love this even more, actually. I just thought another loop. Sorry.
I've got time if you do.
Right, okay. Let me go through these two things because I do think these are fundamental. What Kahneman talks about is the fact that let me start again. So how a memory is formed. Kahneman talks about the fact that memories are formed by what's called the peak end rule. So we remember the peak emotion that we felt, and we remember the end emotion that we felt, okay? And if you think about those things, it raises interesting questions like, well, where's the peak emotion in the experience that you're trying to deliver? Which emotions drive most value for you? What's the end emotion that you're trying to evoke? And which emotions drives most value for you? And that peak end rule forms a memory. So if you think of a memory of, getting married, having kids, whatever it is, something, happy or even sad, when you think of that memory, there's virtually like an email attachment of the emotion that you were feeling at that time, right? So that's one part of memory. The bit of memory that you really love is a fishing analogy, okay? So the other part of a memory is that a memory is like a fishing net. So you can imagine a fishing net, and imagine this fishing net that's below the waterline, okay? And imagine picking up one knot of this fishing net. And as you pick up this one knot of the fishing net, that knot is a memory, okay? Now, the interesting bit for me is that one knot is attached to other knots, which is attached to the whole of the net, okay? And that one knot is a memory of, what you did last week, okay? Going to a restaurant, whatever it may be, an experience. And each of those other knots that are around it are influencing that one knot, okay? And those other knots could be going to that restaurant before. It could be going to similar restaurants. It could be going around, whatever. You get the idea. The idea is that all of those memories are connected. The bit that it's below the water is the difference between the subconscious and the conscious. So by picking that memory up, you're bringing it into your conscious mind. Okay, I hope I'm not getting too complicated here. And it's a bit like an email. It's then a bit like opening a Word document. Because you've picked up that knot and brought it above the surface level of the water, it's like opening a Word document and making a change. And then you save it and it goes back down again, okay? But the memory is different. Does that make sense? Because you've pulled that knot up and examined it, and you've had recent other experiences, that influences that memory. And when it goes back down below the waterline and into your subconscious, it's changed, which is why when you think back to, I'm sure your family or friends will have, in jokes that of things that you did back when you were at school or wherever it may be, or on a holiday or whatever else, and everybody laughs and jokes about them and always raises them, etc. But actually, if you went back to that actual act, it probably wasn't as big or as important as everybody now makes it out to be,
Yeah.
And that's because
my wedding speech was hilarious. Absolutely.
But that's because you keep bringing it up and it keeps growing, or changing. The perception of it keeps changing. It could be that you're pulling it up, you're looking at the wedding speech and you're thinking about it, and then you've just seen a YouTube video of somebody giving a really good wedding speech, and you go, actually, mine was really bad, wasn't it? And you get the idea. So the point I'm trying to make is, when you're thinking about an experience, and we've spent all this podcast talking about an experience, you know what? We should have been talking about memory because it's actually the memory that is the most important thing. Does that make sense?
Well, maybe it's a great example of sort of having that key memory built into the end.
Yes.
Because if we'd have started talking about memory, maybe people wouldn't actually take away this as the key lesson, the key understanding.
Sure.
But now we've left this to the end. Totally intentionally, obviously. Maybe that will be something that people then take away with them and sort of think, because is it the old stage show saying or whatever it is, it's like people will forget what you say but they'll remember how you make them feel, that kind of thing. And it's like, what is it that people can take with them that will stick in a memory? And I don't know if you've heard or read the book called Talk Triggers by Jay Baer. It's kind of along that lines,
right?
And but it's more around it's using something within the customer experience that causes people to talk about you,
right?
And that kind of says to me it's a bit like a memory.
Yes.
Uses the example of cookies in Tiptree Hilton hotels or something like that.
Yeah.
People talk about the cookies.
Yes. No. Absolutely. Yeah. And
it's a memory.
Yeah. It's a memory. We have one of the podcasts is on the massive importance of memory in a customer experience. So there's I have to say it's my favorite subject to talk about, because I think it just has so many implications to things and the way that you look at things, basically. So anyway,
well, ultimately, from the pure psychology point of view, we're all made of memories in this moment. From everything that's happened previously, all of our memories or our interpretation of our memories lead up to the person that we are right in this moment.
Correct.
So why would it not be possibly the most important thing to think about?
Yes. And therefore, so the memories that you have influence the expectation that you have. And the memories that you have may not just be that are influencing your expectation, and not necessarily just to deal with the organization that you're currently dealing with. Okay, so you may have memories. It could be a memory of something that was written in the newspaper last week, or something that was on television, or that your friends told you, or that you dealt with a different client in a different situation, but you're now dealing with this organization. So when you think about it again, memories actually build the human being. Okay, because they form your view of life, because you are constantly referring back to, what's your thoughts on I don't know, the pandemic. Okay, and you now immediately think back to what the pandemic has been like for you, and those are obviously all memories. So yeah, it's fascinating.
It's fascinating, and. Have you seen the movie Limitless? It's going to sound like a random question. And you know where I'm going with that, because there's that sort of theory in there that the human brain retains every speck of information. Sure. And this wonder drug unlocks all of those memories. Sure. So everything that you've literally seen in the street or read or anything like that, suddenly this pill allows you to get that. And I was just thinking, if you hadn't seen it, you should, because you probably find it quite an interesting take on this whole sort of idea about memory. Yeah. So, and if people are listening, if you're still listening, because we are geeking out, as we said we probably would at the beginning, check that out. It's a good, fun movie. There we go. So, Colin, this has been absolutely fascinating. I could genuinely talk for hours. So I want everyone to get more of you. So the first thing I want them to do is go and listen to the Inquisitive Customer Podcast. The link will be
Intuitive Customer Podcast.
The Intuitive. It's been a long conversation. Sorry about that. I'll put the links in the show notes, and we'll definitely sort of get and direct people there, because it's a really fun podcast, just because of the dynamics between you and a co-host, and the different dynamic that you bring, and it's a fantastic show.
Good.
And
thank you.
All the other links to connect will be in the show notes. So, Colin, thank you again. It's been so much fun, and have an awesome day.
Thanks a lot, Adam. Cheers.
So that's it for this episode. I hope you found it valuable. I hope you got some great ideas that you can take away and apply to your business to help you grow. If you did, please share it with somebody else that might also find this valuable, because they will thank you for it. Also, to let you know that I have a podcast gift page where I put a lot of resources that I love to share with my listeners. You can find the links to join the Facebook community there, and you can get my book, The Conversational Relationship Marketing, and the audiobook version, all for free, plus a number of other resources I'll be adding over time on that page. So make sure you head there to thinklikeafish.co.uk/podcast gift, and you can help yourself to the things that make most sense to you. And if you have enjoyed the show, please make sure you're subscribed. You'll get updated as the new episodes come out. And finally, last favour, please consider giving the show your honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts. I read every single one. They mean the world from me. I love hearing from my listeners, and it does help others find the show as well. So if you want to go and do that, I'd really appreciate it. But until next time, have an awesome day, and we'll speak soon.